Um, like you said, my name is Leonardo. I grew up here in Aurora. I grew up here, was here almost my whole life uh, until I just wasn't here anymore. I wanted to share a little something different today than what I normally share. The impact of drugs and alcohol and its impact when you don't even know it's impacting you. Not just impacting you by your own drug and alcohol use, but drug and alcohol use of people around you. I grew up in a home where drug and alcohol use were normalized from a really young age. So young that I didn't even realize it was impacting me. At 4 years old, I watched my parents get home invaded. My dad was a drug dealer. My dad was a drug addict. And at 4 years old, because he was a drug dealer, somebody wanted to rob him. So my dad gets home and there's two guys waiting for him in the garage with pistols. They put a pistol to his head, made him open the door. They came in our house to rob us, looking for drugs and money. I'm 4 years old and I don't remember nothing else from when I was 4 years old. But for some reason, I have that stuck in my memory. I remember the two guys that did it. It was one black guy, one white guy. I remember the guy's pistol. And they tied my mom and dad up with extension cords. And they're ransacking the house looking for drugs and money. They can't find the drugs and money. And one of the guys says, if you don't tell us where the drugs and money are at, we're going to kill you. My dad was a gangster, old school. He wasn't going to tell them anything. Even at the risk of being murdered, he wasn't going to tell them anything. My mom was pregnant at the time. My dad wasn't going to tell them anything. When them guys left, they left with one of the guys saying, it's not what we're here for. If we can't find the drugs and money, let's get out of here. They left. I'm 4 years old trying to help untie my parents. And why is that stuck in my head? I don't know, but it didn't stop there. At 5 years old, my dad went to prison. My dad was an alcoholic and a heroin addict. One day, my dad's getting high, and him and my mom get into an argument. My sister runs and calls the police, and when the police come, my dad don't want to go to jail. So instead of entertaining these police, my dad grabbed his rifle, ran out the back door. When the police chased him, my dad turned around and shot a police officer. 5 years old, my dad's gone to prison. My dad went to trial and tried to argue that he was so high that he didn't know what he was doing. That defense didn't work. They gave my dad 14 years to life. So my dad's off to prison when I'm 5 years old. Drugs and alcohol didn't stop. When my dad was in prison, because he was a drug dealer, he continued to be a drug dealer in prison. But now he's using my mom to bring him drugs in prison. So the lifestyle didn't stop. Every weekend, we're going to visit my dad to take him his drugs. By the time I'm 12 years old, me and my older brother, we had experimented with drugs a little bit. We had experimented with weed. When I was a kid, I had asthma. And in Mexican folklore, I guess you could say, THC and um, THC and what do they call it now? CBD was used back then to help alleviate the symptoms of asthma. So they used to give me tea made of boiled marijuana as a kid. And as a kid, we literally had garbage bags full of weed stems in the basement. And that's how me and my brother experimented. We would go down there, we'd shake that bag till all the weed fell to the bottom. We'd go at the bottom, we'd take all the weed and we'd go and get high at 12 years old or less. I just remember it was less than 12 years old because it was before my dad came home from prison. When my dad came home from prison, he assumed that we were already on drugs and experimenting with alcohol. So he treated us like that. My dad used to take me places with him. And again, as soon as he came home from prison, he was back to a heroin addict and a drug dealer. I never stopped in prison. I remember at 12 years old, going with my dad to his friends' houses, and they were all drug dealers. So I'm seeing these things as a kid, and it's becoming normalized in my life. It is becoming normalized. This is not a big deal. I literally watched my dad as a little kid getting shot up with heroin through his neck because all of his other veins were already shot. And I didn't think nothing of it. I remember I started experimenting with gangs and wanting to be in the hood. They didn't want me in the hood. I was a little young kid. They used to run me off all the time. But if I had drugs, they'd accept me in the hood. So when I would hang out with my dad, his friends would give me drugs. They would give me weed. And I'd take that weed and I'd go to the hood and I'd be accepted because I'd be able to hang out if I had weed. If I didn't have weed, they weren't accepting me over there. I started drinking at a young age. By the time I was 13, 14 years old, I was an alcoholic. Back then, I wouldn't have considered myself an alcoholic because I was the alcoholic. I would have not thought I was an alcoholic back then. But now that I'm grown and I'm looking back at how I was growing up, I was an alcoholic at 13, 14 years old. How was it impacting my life? I was making bad decisions at that age because that stuff was normalized. I was making bad decisions. My dad also dealt in cocaine. At that early age, I started experimenting with cocaine. By the time I was 16 years old, I was hooked on cocaine and I was an alcoholic. I was fortunate enough to be, I think, a little bit of an intelligent kid. At 15 years old, I told myself, weed, this is stupid. I don't like this no more. And I quit. But I rationalized away the other drugs. I quit smoking weed because I didn't like it no more. But I still had an excuse. Oh, but cocaine's different. Alcohol's different. So I kept on with the cocaine and alcohol. And then I quit cocaine. I think I was 17 years old, getting high with a bunch of guys and watching how they were acting. And it was like, man, this is stupid. This is crazy. These guys are acting, you know, I mean, they were high, peeking out the windows, paranoid, like all get out. It was a weird feeling to see it in somebody else, but I wasn't seeing it in myself. Luckily, I did see it in somebody else because it's like, man, I got to stop. I quit cocaine at 17 years old. But man, I couldn't quit drinking. I loved that high. I just shared something with Brandon for the first time. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who spent a lot of time in prison, came home telling himself he wasn't going to drink no more till he got his life together. And he did that. He wasn't drinking. He ended up buying a house, getting a good job, getting married, started drinking. He ended up getting a CDL license. He was driving a truck. One day, he's at the bar, drunk, calls his wife to come pick him up. She don't get there fast enough. So he jumps in the car, starts driving home, gets pulled over, catches a DUI, loses his CDL license, immediately lost his job. And he goes through that process, goes and gets another job, then stop drinking. He continues to drink for a while and ultimately gets himself into some trouble, gets locked up again, gets locked up for some months. And me and him are friends. We communicate all the time. I'm calling him. He ain't answering his phone for a couple months. And then somebody tells me, oh, he's locked up. Like, locked up. So I get on the internet. Oh, this guy's locked up for what? I'm like, oh, man, okay. A couple months later, he calls me out the blue. I was like, man, what are you doing getting locked up? I was like, man, how long you been out? I thought he had been out a couple days. He's like, no, I've been out a couple months. Couple months? Why haven't you called me? He's like, man, I wasn't ready for that ass chewing I knew I was going to get when I called you. I'm like, okay, what is wrong with you? What are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm done now. I'm done drinking. He's done drinking. Um, he's done drinking, but he made a comment to me, rationalizing stuff away. He makes a comment to me. He's like, I don't get in trouble every time I drink, but every time I get in trouble, I've been drinking. And that just blew me away. I was like, man, that makes so much sense. That's how my life was. I didn't get in trouble every time I was drinking, but every time I got in trouble, I've been drinking. That stuff had affected me since I was a kid because I saw so much trauma. When my dad came home, I was fully engulfed in drugs. But it came from when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I watched my dad get robbed over drugs. When I was about 8 years old, my mom left me with my uncle for him to babysit us, me and my little brother. My uncle's a heroin addict. My mom leaves us there with him babysitting, and a guy comes over. The guy and my uncle go in the bathroom to get high. I'll never forget. I was a little kid, and they're in the bathroom. I got to use the bathroom. I go knock on the door. You know, they're busy. They don't open the door. I remember me and my little brother, we're sitting down listening to the radio. Some time goes by, and I'm a little kid. We only got one bathroom in the house. I got to use the bathroom. While I'm sitting there waiting, I see the other guy running out the house. I don't say running like running, but he was moving pretty fast, like he was trying to get out of there. And I remember, I'm like, okay. When I got older, I started piecing things together. A little bit later, I go knock on the door. He don't open the door, but I got to go to the bathroom really bad. So I opened the door. I walked in. My uncle's on his knees, slumped over, overdosed. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what an overdose was at 8 years old. I go shake him. He doesn't move. I grabbed him by his hair, lifted his head. He had already vomited on the floor. He had a needle sticking out of his arm. My uncle was dead. I knew that. I remember running to the phone, calling my grandma's house. I remember my cousin picked up the phone. He was a little bit older than me. He was probably a teenager at the time. But I'm like, hey, my uncle Adolfo, he's in the bathroom. He's dead. Is my mom there? He didn't believe me. He's like, nah, she's not here. Hung up the phone. Now me and my little brother, who was probably about 5, 6 years old, are sitting in the house with my dead uncle in the bathroom. Don't know what to do. Hours went by. Go back to the phone, call my grandmother's house again. Hey, my uncle Adolfo's dead in the bathroom. Is my mom there? Same cousin picked up the phone again. He didn't believe me. Either that or he wasn't really paying attention to what I was saying. He's like, nah, man, she's not here. And hung up the phone on me. We sat in that house until I remember until dark when my mom got home. My mom got home, and instead of freaking out, my mom goes in there, pulls the needle out of his arm, goes and gets all the drugs, the drug paraphernalia. I remember my mom putting it in a brown paper bag, crumpling it up, and throwing it in the neighbor's bushes, and then called the police to get the ambulance to come get my uncle. As I got older, I thought about that scenario. What really happened? That guy was a friend of the family that came over and was getting high with my uncle. That guy either killed my uncle or he left my uncle there to die. And I think about it now and I piece it together. My uncle couldn't get high by himself. My uncle only had one arm. So my uncle couldn't stick that needle in his arm by himself. Somebody had to help him get high. So what that told me was they were getting high, and either that guy gave him what they call a hot shot to kill him, or when he started overdosing, he got scared and left him there to die. That is probably the single biggest reason that I never touched heroin in my life. I grew up around it. My dad was a heroin dealer, but I saw the effects of heroin. That same guy was a friend of the family. He was actually my aunt's boyfriend. That guy robbed us several times. He was a dope fiend. That's why I don't put it past him to have killed my uncle, or at least let him sit there to die. He was a dope fiend. We came home one day and our house been robbed. Our house got robbed. We went to the neighbors. Hey, our house got robbed. Y'all see anything today? They're like, yeah, we saw the little black car that's always there. The little black car that has a mural in the window. We're like, dang. He's like, yeah, he was loading the TV in the car. Dude's name was Max. He was my aunt's boyfriend. He robbed us, and nobody said nothing to him because the neighbors see the car there all the time. That dude was a piece of crap. Don't know why he was around, but he was my aunt's boyfriend, so I guess people let him around. Another time, my mom loses her purse. Can't find her purse nowhere. Later on that night, we had a camper parked in the back of the driveway. Later on that night, the camper's on fire. You know, the fire department comes, they put out the fire, they go in the camper trying to find the source of the fire. They come out with my mom's purse. It's like, hey, here. Everything burnt in the camper except my mom's purse. My mom's purse was in a drawer, so fire didn't get to it. It's the only thing that didn't burn. It was my mom's purse. Lo and behold, here's the purse. We believe dude stole the purse, went in the camper, took everything out, and to hide the little evidence, shoved the purse in the drawer, set the camper on fire. And I was a kid at the time, seeing these types of things. As I'm getting older, then I'm doing drugs. And I'm seeing it around my friends. And I'm so young that I'm not realizing the impact it's having on our lives. I was fortunate to have never OD'd as much drugs as we were doing. But it wasn't the same for everybody I knew. At a young age, I was watching my friends overdose. I was 16 years old. My best friend comes over at like 9 in the morning. I just got up. He comes over at 9 in the morning. His name is Mike. He's my best friend at the time. And he's telling me this sob story about him and his girlfriend breaking up last night. He'd been up all night doing drugs. And we're literally sitting here having a conversation from me to you. This is how far we're talking. He's at one side of the table. I'm at the other side, looking just like that. All of a sudden, he stiffens up. His arms go like this. His head pulls back. And I remember just seeing his throat tighten up. And he just tipped over out of the chair. He's on the ground. The guy he was with his sister's brother. They've been up all night. And I'm like, hey, man, this dude's ODing. We got to get him to the hospital. This guy's just as high as him. He's like, nah, he'll be all right. Leave him there. I'm like, dude, he's turning blue. We got to get this guy to the hospital. We went to pick him up, and he was stiff as a board. We picked him up. I remember I grabbed his shoulders. He grabbed his feet. We're walking out the house, trying to get him to the car. Literally, he's still stiff as a board, not breathing. This dude dropped him on the stairs, and he started breathing. Literally, when he dropped him, I had the shoulders. I slipped. He fell, hit the stairs. He went limp, started breathing. But he was still overdosing. We got him. We threw him in the back of the car. Fortunately, we lived 2 blocks away from Copley Hospital at the time. Got him to the hospital, get him in there. They're like, what is he on? I was at least intelligent enough, and luckily I wasn't high. Because if I would have been as high as them, would I have reacted that way? Or would I have been like this guy said, just leave him there. He'll be okay. I had enough sense to tell him he's on cocaine. He's overdosing on cocaine. I don't know how, but I knew that they needed to know what he was on in order to treat him right. Is he going to be okay? What's your name? I'm not telling you my name. Is he going to be okay? They're like, we don't know. He's still not breathing right. I was like, okay, I just need to know if he's going to be okay. This is his name. And I need to know if he's going to be okay. We don't know. I said, all right. I left. I immediately went to his house, knocked on his door, told his mom, hey, Mike is in the hospital. He just overdosed. I left him there, and I'm coming to tell you. Later on that day, I found out that the doctors told him, had he not gotten here any sooner, he'd be dead because he had lost a lot of oxygen for the time that he wasn't breathing. Did that stop that kid from doing drugs? Nope, it didn't. It didn't stop him from doing drugs. It has been something that has been on and off part of my life for a long time. The people that I'm around have been doing drugs for ages. Those things impacted my psychology about drugs. Did I stop doing drugs at that time? Nope. I lost a lot of friends to overdoses. My best friend in the whole world. It was probably, I can't even tell you what date it was, but it was traumatic. I was driving to Atlanta. I do jujitsu. I was going to a jujitsu competition. And I remember waking up in the morning, seeing a message on my phone, and I forgot to check the message. I'm driving to Atlanta, and I go to check my messages, and it's a good friend of mine. named Sam. And he just has a somber message. He's like, hey, bro, call me when you get this message. And I'm thinking, damn, somebody's locked up. And as I'm driving to Atlanta, I'll call him later. My son's in the back seat with a couple of the other guys. They were sleeping, but my son's in the back seat and Sam calls. I pick up the phone. Sam tells me my best friend overdosed last night. It hurt hard. And I started crying because every time I come visit Aurora, I would go visit my friend. And I would tell him, bro, what are you doing, bro? Why are you still living this lifestyle? Oh, this is all I know. That's what he would tell me. This is all I know. And it hurt because this kid he was on federal parole. And he was telling me, he's like, man, I get off of parole. I think it was going to be like July 7th or something. He's like, man, once I get off parole, I'm going to do this, that, and the other. It's like he was basing his whole life for the date he got off parole. It was like 3 or 4 days before he got off parole, he overdosed. He overdosed and they couldn't save him. So I'm sitting there crying. My best friend's gone and my son's in the back seat. And he's like, who was it, Dad? And when I told him, my son was upset because my son had met him. I introduced this guy to my son, introduced my son to him, and told my son, this is like my best friend. We've been friends since we was 13, 14 years old. So many people that I can name that have overdosed because of the lifestyle we were living. We were around drugs all the time. And it was normalized. My brother married a girl, and it doesn't always happen the way it happened in my life. My brother married a girl that got into a car accident. She got into a car accident and crushed both her legs. They put her on pain meds. She got hooked to those pain meds. She got hooked on those pain meds, and it became a problem. Her and my brother started having problems, and they ended up separating because of the drug use. And because they're trying to work it out, like, you got to go to rehab. My brother tells you got to go to rehab. So she's like, you know what? I'm going to go to rehab. She goes to rehab. And instead of getting help in rehab, she ended up in rehab with a bunch of people that were there for court order. They were court ordered to be in rehab. So a bunch of drug dealers, a bunch of drug addicts. They weren't trying to get help. They were just there because the court made them go. So instead of getting help, she got introduced to drug dealers and other drug addicts. They introduced her to heroin. So she went from these pain medications to heroin. Now she's hooked on heroin. So the problems got worse because the environment she got put in, or she thought she was going to get help, ended up being there around a bunch of people that weren't looking for help. She was a nurse. She was getting prescriptions written by doctors, and her addiction got worse. She ended up overdosing in front of her child, my niece, like 3 times. The last time she overdosed, she was with a boyfriend that used to buy her all the drugs she wanted. She overdosed in the bathtub and he left her there, scared. He didn't know what to do. And she died. Because of that death, my little brother had to raise my older brother's kids. Because my older brother was locked up. For what? Drugs. So my little brother raised those kids because mom overdosed and daddy's locked up for drugs. Whole totally different scenario. Her addiction started from pain meds that she needed because she got into a car accident. Drugs can impact so many people apart from the addict. So many people outside of just the addict can become affected by drugs. Those memories of me as a kid, why do I have those memories? Why are they so burnt in my head? My dad died an alcoholic. Crazy. And I don't smile because it's funny. I smile because the irony. My dad was a heroin addict most of his life. He quit doing heroin literally a few months before he died of alcohol. He quit doing heroin a few months before he died of alcohol. It burns my heart because my dad was my best friend. We used to drink together. I was 18 years old when my dad died, and we used to drink together. I didn't know he was dying. He did. He never told nobody. He had already went to the hospital. They told him he was dying. His liver was shot. I'll never forget the last drink we took together. My dad was in the room, laying in bed, sick, dying. I remember I got home. I didn't think nothing of it. I just thought he was sick. I get home and I had a bottle. I was an alcoholic. I had a bottle of Southern Comfort, a drink that I used to drink because that's what my dad introduced me to. I was known, me and my brothers were known for drinking Southern Comfort, and it came from my dad. That's what my dad drank when we were kids. So we picked up the same bottle that my dad used to drink. That day I get home and I tell my dad, hey, you want a drink? My dad, being sick, got out of bed, came out to the dining room, grabbed the bottle, and literally drank it like this. Like a baby sucking out a bottle. I'll never forget that. He took a big, big chug, gave it back, and went back to lay down. That was the last drink I ever had with my dad. I didn't know he was dying. Had I known he was dying, I'd have never offered him that bottle. If I didn't knew it was alcohol, I'd have never offered him that bottle. But I didn't know. Still young, naive. I've lost, getting up there in age, I've lost a lot of friends to alcohol and drugs. A lot of people that are just acquaintances, alcohol and drugs. It impacts more than just the user. Families fall apart because of drugs and alcohol. I've seen that too. I just did a video 2 weeks ago about alcohol because somebody that's really, really dear to me is an alcoholic and I can't reach that person. I try to talk to them and I'm not getting through. I went and did some research about it and how it affects your more than just your health. It affects your character. It affects your energy. It's to the point where this person that I love with all my heart, I can't be this close to them because I feel the energy bad. I have to stay away. So I did this and I did some research on it and try to figure out a way, how can I reach this person? That's why I changed my speech today. Normally it's a whole different speech. But it's something that is gone from generation to generation to generation. So now it's impacting me in the next generation. How do I help break that chain? I've broken chains before. My dad went to prison, I went to prison. My older brother went to prison, my little brother went to prison. At some point, chains have to be broken. I broke the chain. None of my kids have been to prison. My brothers have all changed their lives. None of their kids have been to prison. Chains can be broken. How do we break that chain? How do we help people break that chain of drugs and alcohol? What can we do to help break those chains? I don't know. I'm asking because I don't know. You guys are the future of the system. Sometimes there's going to be more than what's in front of you that you're going to have to look at to find out how you can help people. You guys are going to be the probation officers, the officers, state's attorneys, whatever it is that you guys decide to take as your career path. You're going to run into situations. How are you guys going to be able to deal with it? How are we going to get to the bottom of what's really going on? It might be a crime committed because of drugs and alcohol. How are we going to be able to deal with it? How are we going to get to the source of the problem?
Let me do a quick little break here, all right? So this row, I want you guys to pass your sheets forward. This row, pass it to your right and then kind of bring them my way so I can collect some of those questions. If you didn't write down a question, do that. I'm going to give you just a kind of quick reminder of some of the things that we've been talking about in class. Hopefully you might be reflective on social learning theory, right? There is the perspective that you're hearing about people becoming a product of their environment, right? Leonardo is going to be doing a discussion right after this class. If you happen to want to see a different style of presentation as well, we're going to be over at John C. Dunham Hall 109. This will be a class where we combine both of our policing sections. So if you want to hear more, I'm extending that invite to you. Again, we're in John C. Dunham Hall. That's the one with the windmill that doesn't actually work, but it looks cool, right? Our little windmill. So 109 John C. Dunham Hall, that will be from 10:40 to 11:45. The other thing I want to note really quick, and it's really apropos in talking about drug issues, I sent out an email inviting all of you that if you have an opening at 1 o'clock today in Yorkville, the Kendall County Drug Court graduation ceremony is going to be going on. We're going to hear about from a lot of people, including folks that have been addicted, that have gone through now drug court, in addition to all the people that now surround themselves in the system. I can tell you when Leonardo was growing up in Aurora, we didn't have drug court. We didn't have things like the Boys to Men and these other community groups, Junior ROTC at East Aurora, a lot of these community type initiatives that now we surround at-risk youth with. The last thing that I want to kind of point out, and I personally like this part of it because I mentioned that when Leonardo was first coming to classes at AU, and knowing that he grew up just blocks from here, and by the way, this stuff is still going on in the city of Aurora. That's probably shouldn't be a big surprise to you. And we went out to lunch, and to this day, I still think about how naive I was when I asked the question, hey, when's the last time you were on our campus? When's the last time you've been to Aurora University? And he kind of looked at me a little bit puzzled. He's like, I've never been there before. I'm like, you grew up just blocks from the university, you've never actually stepped foot on campus? Think about what that means. Think about what that says about us as a community, not just the university, but Aurora as a whole, what it means for you as community members and future community leaders. You don't have to be involved in criminal justice to make an impact on people's lives. You are responsible for understanding that there's a lot of lives that are at risk, and don't ignore it. Don't turn the other cheek. Don't do the blind eye. Get involved. You can make a huge difference in people's lives if you recognize that when we're talking about the typhoid Marys, remember the presentation here, we're talking about the disease spreaders, that they're built. And they're built when too many people haven't paid attention when they should have paid attention. Okay? So that's in the sheets. Sorry, Leonardo, go ahead. The breaking point there.
What time are we at?
We go to 9:20.
We can go,
10:20.
we can do questions now, if anybody has
Sure.
questions.
Yeah. So I know they're coming my way too as well. Yeah, if you guys have any that you want to ask right now, go ahead. I do this because I know you're a quiet bunch, because it's like an intro class, so I collected them. But go ahead, somebody shout out a question for me.
One of my questions was, did anyone warn you about the use of drugs rather than you just seeing it?
Not really. My dad was old school. He was a matter of fact type of guy. When we were growing up, my dad never really took us in the corner and spanked us and told us, don't do this, don't do that. He never grabbed us by our ear and took us out of the hood. My dad was the type that would sit us down and say, hey, listen, if you do this, this is gonna be the result. If you do that, this is what's gonna end up happening. That's how he was. So, yeah, he told us, don't do drugs or whatever, but like I say all the time, it's hard for me to have credibility. I still drink. You know what I mean? I do, I drink, but I don't drink like I used to. So when my dad is telling me, don't do X, Y, and Z, when you're the biggest gangster I know, you're a heroin addict and an alcoholic, it's hard for me to take that, and that's one of the hurdles that we have, what we just talked about it a second ago. One of the hurdles we have. How do I look telling somebody you're drinking too much when I got a beer in my hand? That's the reality. That's one of the things that we face when we're trying to help somebody. What example are we setting? If we're not setting a good example, it's kind of hard to help But the reality is, there is a difference between usage and abuse. There is. We have to be able to accept that also, you know? So it's kind of a slippery slope, I guess. Anybody else?
So you say you have kids. How have you been able to break the chains between your kids not like being like alcoholics or not getting into trouble? What did you do differently with them, if considering the fact that they know all these stories about everything, and they're, who even said, I think their cousin is like, she has no mom, and then her dad's in prison. So that's someone that's close to them. How do you think that you did something differently for them not to do that?
I moved away. I went to prison, spent a lot of time in prison, and when I got out, I moved away. But I have other family members that recognized, I'm about to have a child. I need to get it together. I think I was an example for my little brother. My little brother changed his life, and because he changed his life, his kids didn't get to witness a lot of those things that he was going through as a child. So I think one of the biggest things is maturity and how we're able to communicate as we mature. My dad died when he was 42 years old. So he was very, very young. He was a young parent trying to tell us how to live. My kids, I had already matured when my kids came of age to start understanding. So I was able to better communicate those things to them. And not to say my kids are perfect, but fortunately, none of them have been to prison. None of them have gone through the things that I've gone through. I have one kid, he doesn't like alcohol at all, you know. Matter of fact, out of all my kids, I think I only have one that actually drinks. From the oldest, he's a sergeant in the military. He doesn't drink. Second oldest, I think he drinks. I don't really communicate with him that much. I think he drinks, but very, very minimal social. My third oldest is an attorney in Florida. He doesn't drink. The next one is my daughter. She doesn't drink. The next one is my son, who I know he's drank before, but he doesn't really like it, so he doesn't drink. And then, the one that does drink, and then the youngest one that just doesn't like alcohol. So I think it's, and they used to, I know the last two used to drink when they were younger, but I think he just grew up and decided, I don't really like alcohol. The youngest one anyway, and the other one still does.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah.
Do you think there's any way to actually get somebody like off of drugs if they're really like committed to doing it, like cocaine?
Yes, yes. I quit doing cocaine a couple times in my life when I was hooked. So it's doable. It's a matter of, I think it's a matter of finding a way to reach individuals, because everybody's different. Everybody's different. And I think that's our biggest hurdle is trying to figure out how to reach that particular person that we're talking about. But I mean, yeah, there is, I think heroin, I don't know if I'm naive these days, I guess, but heroin will feed itself. If you get hooked on heroin, you're going to get sick when you decide to quit. I don't know of any other drugs that are like that, but that's one that gives a big problem to people, because people will actually get sick when they decide to quit. You know, I think at a higher level, I mean, you decide you're an alcoholic and you want to quit, you're probably going to have some headaches for a couple of days or whatever. But that happens with caffeine. You know, caffeine is completely legal, but you'll be surprised at how many people are addicted to caffeine. You know, people don't view it as a harsh drug. I do. I try not to consume caffeine very often. I've seen, literally, I've seen caffeine addiction. My dad was a gangster. My mom was completely opposite. Never done drugs, never drank, never done anything in her life. But my mom had a caffeine addiction. That same scene with the bottle that I saw I saw my mom when I was a real little kid. I remember my mom telling me, I need to go buy a Pepsi. She was hooked on Pepsi. And I remember she ran to the store. She said she had a headache, ran to the store, came out with a 2-liter. And I'm a little kid sitting in the front seat, watched my mom pop that 2-liter and start guzzling that thing. And I didn't know at the time But as I got older, I have that memory, like, my mom was hooked on caffeine. It was an addiction. So it's just, how do we view addictions?
If, so, like, for example, like, I know somebody that is hooked on cocaine, and we've been trying to reach out to him and help him out. But he kind of like denies a lot of stuff. Like, he denies somebody reaching out, like, he thinks it's perfectly fine to do it and things like that. It's like he's refusing it, like
Right,
refusing to
right.
vote for it.
In a situation like that, I mean, you can't really force anybody. You can do interventions. You can't force anybody to do anything. And the only thing you can do is, I don't know what your beliefs are, but hope and pray that something horrible and tragic doesn't happen before that person gets the mindset of, wait a minute, is this really necessary? I'm a firm believer that no matter what the addiction is, it's gonna start spreading and it's gonna start affecting life in general. You know, whether you lose your car first, your job, your woman, whatever it is, things are gonna start falling apart because of addiction, because addiction is a negative energy. It's a negative energy that's gonna feed itself. The more negative it is, the more bad things are gonna start happening around it until it falls apart. Like I said, this person that I care about, I can't be this close to that person because the energy is bad. It's like, I gotta go over here somewhere, because the energy's bad. So, I mean, that's all I can say is, if a direct intervention is not helping, you just gotta keep monitoring and you know, for lack of a better way of saying it, start guilting that person, you know? It's gotta come from somewhere. You gotta figure out how to, do I wanna be around this person when they're high? You know what I mean? We wanna be around this person because we care. So it's kinda hard to say. I'm not a drug therapist. I'm trying to get people to understand there's a problem. How are we gonna be able to figure it out? How are we, as a community, able to step in and help figure that one out? You know, there's gotta be people around that care. Somebody's gotta have an influence. You gotta find whoever it is that is gonna have the strongest influence.
Leonardo, some of these questions I know are gonna get a little bit into your other talk, so I want to make that point, but I'll tell you that some of the students are asking, how did your mom, talk to you after your dad, went to prison? So we're kind of wanting to know about, how you were influenced in that way. And then there was a question that asked, you said you wanted to mess around with gangs. Did you actually end up joining? How did that impact what you chose?
Come watch my second one.
Yeah, right.
Come watch the second one.
There was a series of these that were related.
As far as my mom communicating with us, my mom was obviously the logical one. She never done drugs, never drank, never got involved in the violent stuff my dad was involved in. And my grandma was another big influence. My grandma was a saint. My grandma lived in the heart of the hood. Yes, I was in a gang. My grandma lived in the heart of the hood. And my grandma would literally sit us down and talk to us before we would walk out the door. Like to let us know she knows what's out there. Be careful and make sure you come back. You know, my grandma was a saint. She used to bless us before we would walk out the house. You know, so do I remember those things? Yes, I remember some of those positive talks, but they just weren't effective when I was so deep into what I was into. Those talks weren't really effective. That's why I'm telling you, we got to find somebody that has that influence that can break through. You know.
Asking about your opinion on legalization of cannabis, and do you think gangs are different today than they were in the past?
Gangs are definitely different today. I can't really say how different because I don't know how things are done now. I know that these kids are getting more violent a lot younger. As far as legalization of cannabis, I truly believe, I've practiced law for 40 years. I truly believe that everybody should have the right to do what it is they want to do. I think a lot of the use of drugs is the how do you put it? I guess the vice of it all. You know what I mean? you wanna do what you're not supposed to do. You know what I mean? There's other countries that have all drugs legal and they have less drug problems than we do. You know, so I don't know how much of an impact, the legalization of it all has, but based on my legal mind says you should be able to do anything that you wanna do. It's your choice. If you turn it into an addiction and it ends up ruining your life, it truly is part of the choices you make. So I think we have to think about better choices versus what's legal and what's not legal. Heroin can be legal tomorrow, I'm not doing it. You know what I mean? So I think that's a bigger question.
What advice would you give someone who's in the same situation as you were in?
Don't do it. Drugs are bad, violence is bad, gangs are bad. What advice would I give? I give kids advice, go to the next one. You'll hear me bash that lifestyle. I was the predator growing up, and now I want kids to recognize the predator when he's coming. Because there's gonna be somebody out there trying to talk you into some knuckleheaded stuff. And if you can recognize it when it's coming, maybe it'll help you make a better decision.
What are some of the things that you're doing currently to make a difference?
Nothing, I'm lazy. I do nothing at all.
Right.
I own a martial arts school in Georgia, and I try to funnel at-risk youth into martial arts. I found that, this is gonna sound crazy, but gangbanging is addictive, just like anything. You get people that get addicted to skateboard riding. There's a thrill involved. You get a person that is addicted to motocross. It's his favorite sport. You can't take it away from him. It might just be a sport, but you can't take it away from him. Football, baseball, whatever it is. I found that same thrill that I had gangbanging, getting into street fights. I found it in martial arts. Now I get to fight people. Nobody call me police. So.
How do we get kids to escape the normalization of drugs and alcohol if it's been normalized in their environments like it was for you?
I think the focus, I think the only negative that I focused on was heroin, and that's because growing up, I seen heroin addicts just down and out and you know, and I've seen it in alcoholism. I mean, I'm talking about 17 years old, I had a friend die of alcohol poisoning at 17 years old. You know what I mean? It's not some far-fetched ideal that it's only happening to lifelong alcoholics. It's not. I mean, it can happen to young people. I mean, I was an alcoholic from the age of 13, and that guy that I'm saying passed away, I literally just saw his picture pop up on Facebook because his older brother posted it, and I saw the picture. I'm like, man, he was one of my best friends, but dead at about 17 or 18 years old. Literally homeless, somewhere under the bridge here in Aurora, died, drunk, and passed out and froze. You know, it happens. It's you know, it's tragic, but it happens.
What are some instances where a program has been helpful that you've seen for yourself or any other friends?
Programs that have been helpful. I was too young to absorb the benefit, but when I was young, I was always in trouble, and they sent me to, it was called Wilder Wilderness Camp in Minnesota. It was the greatest experience of my life, but I was too young to understand what it was they were giving me, what it was they were offering me. And I mean, they put me in tune with nature. I was a lumberjack at 15 years old. We went to work every day. We went to school every day. We had a lot of free time. We did a lot of activities. It was a great environment for a kid, even if they weren't locked up. I just happened to be locked up. But I didn't really understand what they were offering me. They were showing me that there was a world outside of the gangbang that I was living in. And I was too young to absorb that, what they were offering me.
Do you mind if I get our guests to introduce? You guys mind introducing yourselves in terms of where you're coming from in the city and
It's my cousin. My name's Adrian.
All right, Adrian, you live in Aurora too?
I used to. I moved out because it's just too much, man.
Okay.
So I live out northwest suburbs now, Bartlett area.
Okay. Adrian?
My name is Alex. I'm a lifelong friend of Leonardo and Adrian. I've known them my whole life, and I live in Elgin.
Okay.
So my best friend, I met in prison when he was 12, 13.
Thanks, Alex.
Changed his life though, so.
All right.
I'm a Don. I grew up in Aurora. On the opposite side of him, but we actually did time together. So
Okay.
I'm Louis. I do a Wise Guys ministry, which means warriors in service everywhere God uses your service. And I reach out to ex-offenders mainly, just guys. And these are two of the brothers that are part of the group. So thank you.
my name is Israel. I'm kind of know him through. I'm from Aurora. Was on the opposite side as him, and met a real good friend of his, and he was also on the opposite side, gang-wise, and we just connected, and I got invited here, and I'm blessed. This is beautiful.
How are the streets different today for a kid growing up in Aurora than it was for you guys?
Well, today, they're not really hanging on street corners like we used to. So now they're like in pockets of probably houses, and they got probably more violent. So they don't care who they shoot or take out now. They don't need it. There's no emotion. They're just like, they're numb to what they do. Video games took the emotion and the contact away from them. So yeah, physical.
I believe that strongly.
To us, if you're like, we didn't play video games growing up. We
Yes.
just hung out and we played sports and we did that, and we just happened to be the product of who was around us. So like I've seen a couple of his things already, but so I can relate to him. And so we grew up on different sides. And we had friends on both sides.
Sure.
And like he said the gangs chose your friends, and they kind of do.
Yeah.
So, but we all made our mistakes, and we're growing up. We're figuring it out. We've seen a lot of stuff, probably that kids shouldn't see,
Right.
and we're trying to get back and do what we need to do to make I would say our wrongs, trying to turn them into a better, positive thing for younger kids.
Okay.
We're trying to get the kids off the streets and away from that life.
Right.
And let them know there's something better. So,
Yeah. What were your relationships like with the police?
I have no problem with it no more.
Phenomenal. Phenomenal.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I just ran into one at the gym, and he was retired. And then he introduced me. He said, "You remember him?" He's like, "Oh yeah, I remember. I caught you once or twice." And I was like, "Yeah."
I'm gonna one up you right now.
Huh?
I'm gonna one up you right now. So, if you guys come to my next one, you'll hear a almost totally different story. But I went to prison. I was sentenced to 45 years. Ended up winning on appeal. Ended up getting dropped down to 20 after 10 years straight. The person that prosecuted me is one of your professors upstairs, Drew Cisnowski, who I hadn't seen in 30 years. And I seen him a little while ago. We talked. And he recognized me. He shared something with me that I didn't know that was pretty heartwarming. I had somebody in my corner that I didn't know was that deep in my corner. But I'm not bitter. I did 10 years straight. I'm not bitter about it. I was manipulated into this gang lifestyle. I'm not bitter about it because I manipulated a bunch of other kids behind me into this gang lifestyle. And my focus is to try to teach these newer generations that it's propaganda. Don't fall for that nonsense because none of it's real, So at 12 years old, this guy was manipulated into something, and look, found a mentor. So yeah, it's one of those things. That guy did his best to get me 100 years. I ain't bitter. I ain't bitter at all. It was actually good to meet him.
Good, yeah. You think about the larger context of the education that you're having, and, you hear about a terrible upbringing. And I will tell you, Leonardo absolutely loves his parents, the same way that y'all would love your parents. I had an alcoholic father. He wasn't in my life very much. Later on in life, when he was in my life, there wasn't a damn person that could say a negative thing about him. Don't tell me that, right? He's my dad. Nobody else is gonna replace that. The point is that as a society and as a community, when we begin to blame bad parenting on crappy situations that happen, we miss the boat. You can't blame bad parents the whole time. As a community, we need to figure out what it is that we're offering up to begin to balance out all of that negativity. Right? If we're not having outreach, if we're not having opportunities to mentor the youth, if we don't have targeted interventions, especially with our most at-risk youth, we're gonna continue to be the most violent country on the planet. Right? It's something that we remember from class. We are without a doubt the most violent country on the planet. The irony is we lock up more Americans than anywhere else on the planet as well. Just because we lock up more people than anywhere else on the planet doesn't make us any safer. There's not a connection there. So where's the connection? And importantly, how is it that you're gonna utilize your education? Again, I know a lot of you are not necessarily criminal justice majors because this is an introduction to criminal justice, but it is your community. It is your future kids. It is the future families that you'll be around. So how will you intervene? How will you use your education to actually improve your communities, or turn a blind eye to it, ignore it? Well, it's not my family, so it's not that important. Well, you're not using your tuition dollars very well, nor your education. So just recognize that you do bear a certain side of responsibility because of what you learned today. And I hope that you'll change your life because of it. All right, we about time? We got a couple more minutes. Got anything else?
You guys got any other questions?
Anything else? Did we get to it all? All right, thank you, Leonardo.